All right, welcome to this Amphil Scotch Talk on navigating difficult donor meetings. My name is Jeremy Beer. I'm the co-founder and executive chairman at Amphil, and really happy to have you all with us here today. We have a big crowd of people registered for this Scotch Talk, so happy to have you all here. And if you're wondering, we do send around, we're recording this, and we will send you the link to this after the Scotch Talk is over, so that you can relive the wondrous moments we will no doubt have here over the next hour or so. If you have been to these before, you know how they work. Very casual, very informal. We want to hear from you. In fact, right now, if you want to go ahead, I would invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, your name and who you're with. It's really helpful to us. Sometimes we can direct examples or think about where you're at in your institution as we give our answers and things. So if you don't mind doing that, we would love to have you introduce yourself in the chat. Questions. The easiest way to ask a question of our esteemed panelists here today is to use the Q&A function that Zoom has at the bottom of the screen there. I try to monitor that as we go along. You can also stick a question in the chat, but just realize it might get lost if there's activity in the chat. If we've managed to generate a lot of controversy we're hoping to generate a lot of controversy here today. That's usually what we try to do. Not the case. Last thing, we call these things Scotch Talks because they are supposed to be like you're sitting around having a drink and discussing, in this case, man, how to get through and navigate difficult donor meetings. So if you're having a drink with us today, which I know some of you do, are regulars, which we appreciate, does not mean you're an alcoholic, even though it's only 1:00 p.m. my time on a Thursday. I have poured myself a little bit of tequila here today because I didn't have any scotch here in the office. That's on me. And I'll have our panelists tell us what they are drinking, if anything at all. So I see the chat should now be enabled. So I would love to hear from you, and thank you already for starting to do that. All right. I'm going to let people introduce themselves today. I already know these people. I have the great honor of working with them at Amphil, but going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get going. Mallory, let's start with you.
All righty. Well, thank you for having me back on Scotch Talks, Jeremy. It's been a few years, so good to
Really?
be here. Yeah, it's been, I think the last time I did a Scotch Talk with you was on Foundation, so it's probably in the archive somewhere. But I'm Mallory Staley. I'm an associate director for Amphil's downtown Phoenix office. Started working with Amphil back in 2016 for a number of years, had a brief hiatus to do some major gifts in the higher ed space and in the policy world as well. So I know that there's a few attendees in here. I recognize some names. So for those of you who may be familiar with Amphil or with a number of us on the call today, we appreciate you being here. We're excited to talk about difficult donor meetings.
Did you say you were with, you should say though, if I miss this, I apologize. So I was reading the chat. You were most recently raising money as a major youth officer for the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation?
Yes. So I was
Can
at
I
the
say
Marine
that?
Corps Scholarship Foundation for a couple of years. Yep. And I was an alumna of the program there. So it was a wonderful way for me to give back.
Yeah. Excellent. Kevin Lee.
That's me. I am Kevin Lee. I'm here from Steubenville, Ohio. I've been in major gift fundraising and development for about 17 and a half years. Most of my experience is in actual major gift fundraising and for Catholic higher education. I've been in a number of difficult situations, often caused by my organization, not often by the donors. So that's the caveat. When I first read this topic, I heard difficult donors. I was like, usually the difficulty doesn't come from the donor side, but now hearing you say, oh no, it's difficult donor meetings. So that's a little bit different, and it's often caused, like I said, by our organizations, our loved and cherished organizations.
Exactly right. Thank you. And yeah, Kevin has experience both as a major gifts officer and as a development director. So as does our third panelist, Ben Domain. Ben?
Thanks, Jeremy. My name is Ben Domain, and I'm director. I'm here in Denver, where I'm calling from, which is pretty fun. Worked for a group for 7.5 years, and during that time, I was a major gift officer, became a development director. We were going through large scale growth, so from 6 million a year to 75 million to they just completed a $250 million campaign. Sorry, so that was really, really fun to kind of learn my chops there, and went over to another organization here in the Denver area, and then 3 years ago, I got a phone call from our now CEO, Chris Kidmeyer, who said, "Hey, could you come over to the office? We could use your assistance." So have my MBA with a concentration in philanthropy. So, but this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. I love major gifts. If you know me, you know that's true. And then it's funny when I was reached out to ask difficult donor meetings, it's like, oh, what do I know about that? And then the stories kind of flooded me, like, oh yeah, okay, I do remember this. So this is a fun topic. So, and I am drinking a Spindrift. I'm a fruity kind of guy.
Okay, yeah. Ben also knows how to navigate difficult defensive lines because he was a center, right? You were a center, right?
Yes.
For a little school in Louisiana called Louisiana State University. Played on. They have a varsity football team there, which you may or may not be aware of.
Apparently a school, which is crazy.
There's a university attached to a football team in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Exactly.
Ben was part of that. So, all right. Thanks for joining us. We'll get going here. Actually, Kevin, I'm not going to start with you, but I'm going to start with the thing that you raised, which is one of the reasons donor meetings, and we have a nice narrow topic today, right? We're not all over the place on major gifts, although you can ask us whatever you want about fundraising in the Q&A. But we're going to be focused on these difficult donor meetings question. And as you pointed out, Kevin, oftentimes the difficulty is not with the donor. It's that the organization has done something wrong by the donor. So Ben, let me start with you. What's your go-to? How do you respond if your organization has upset the donor?
Yep. The first thing I like to start off with is I'll actually use some data that I really appreciate. There was a study done on PTSD and trauma from, and they were trying to understand where this comes from, like post-traumatic stress disorder and shell shock. And they said it's a phenomenon that is brought about only around World War II, because prior to World War II, you would fight during the day and at night you'd rest. What they found during that time is there was no PTSD because at night the warriors would sit around the campfire and share their joys from the day. And they found when they would articulate joys would grow and expand, like of the successes that day. But in the evening, they would also mourn the loss of their brethren, right? And what they would found was their anger and their hurt and their frustration would dissipate. And so anyways, I heard that years ago, and that was helpful because what I learned is if I just sit with the donor and seek first to understand and have them articulate their frustration, 90% of the time, their anger and frustration would dissipate. So that's what and you can kind of reach some common ground with learning what it is that upset them. So that's not the full answer, Jeremy, but I really like that ethos.
So listening is the answer.
Yeah.
letting them vent it out.
Correct.
And not being defensive.
Correct.
Not even explaining so much, right? But just listening. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely.
Mallory, that ever happened to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I consider how to approach a difficult donor meeting, I try to look back at fundraising principles that we talk about at AmPhil all the time. And the key thing here is donor relationships, right? So if you focus on building a relationship with your donors, particularly your major donors, doing things like keeping them near, dear, and clear, fostering kind of their identity and belonging of being a donor to your organization, those difficult donor meetings become less difficult, right? Because you kind of understand that donor, maybe some of their priorities, when you start to get to know them, asking them, why do you give to us? And what's important about our mission to you? What's your biggest hope for society, or how we're going to potentially change a particular issue? And so there's a number of ways that you can make them mad, right? It might be a lack of communication, or you didn't share impact with them, or maybe there's been some turnover that they don't understand. But if you have that strong relationship up front and that trust that the donor has built with your organization, just makes that a little easier. So I just wanted to start with kind of that framework of how I'm probably going to answer a lot of your questions with that in mind, Jeremy.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I'm actually going to pitch this question then to you as well, since you brought it up even in your introduction.
Right.
So that strikes me that you've had some experience with this where you walk into a meeting, maybe you don't know, that maybe you do know the donor is upset with the organization and you're still able to get a meeting. Maybe you didn't know. Um, what are some tips you would have for how do you navigate when you find out that the donor is upset with the organization?
Yeah, so the first one is not to overreact on your own part. Never to be defensive, to listen, to ask those clarifying questions. I mean, that's the default start, right? But also, if they are showing anger or even passion in some way to you, you know that there's a way back. So to kind of keep an optimistic idea that, okay, well, out of the end of this conflict, we can actually grow in our own relationship. Now I'm offering to help in some way, right? So did we do something wrong? Like, let's establish that. And can we make that right? And just ask those questions. What would happen? You know, like, what would be the ideal scenario to make this right for you is kind of one of those situations I kind of lay out. And then, of course, you don't always have the power to do what it is that they want you to do. So you have to explain that as well. But I've had a couple of these where in office where somebody who hadn't been contacted for years was reached out to, was kind of ghosting us, hadn't talked to us in a while. They still kind of gave us a check here and there, but it was like they were still on our list. I was like, oh, this was a big donor of mine. It was off of my portfolio. I don't know what's going on with that. And so a new employee comes on, they finally get a hold of him, and he just lets her have it, just vents and just screams at her essentially on the phone, and she's in her tears. And you know, and I'm sharing an office, and I can hear this kind of going down, and I'm just like, I don't know what was going on. I reach out to him, and he's just really apologetic. All of a sudden, it was kind of like what Ben was saying. He just needed that to get off his chest. And sadly, she took the brunt of it, and I didn't have an opportunity to get any of that. I got the let's fix this mode kind of situation, which you know is often the case for me. I'm the fixer in any office anyway. So that, like, when a problem arises, I'm the one that they always talk to and bring up. But that's been helpful as well.
It is. It just points to some of one of the realities here is that if you're a frontline gift officer, you're going to take some flack.
Absolutely.
You're going to wear it for the organization. For I mean, let's face, no organization is perfect with respect to their donors, communication, reporting back impact, whatever it might be, and so that is part of the deal, isn't it? You just got to wear it sometimes. Kevin, let me stay. So we can come back to that. People want more specific. Want to lay out a specific scenario? Let us know. Working through navigating difficult donor meetings when the organization has done something to upset the donor. Let's put it kind of on the donor side now, Kevin. How would you deal? Sometimes donors want more control than is wise or possible or perhaps even legal to give them. How do you deal with a donor who wants too much control?
Yeah, and that is a difficult one because oftentimes those are really big numbers. And what you're dealing with.
It's easier when it's $10.
Right.
We're talking
$100
when we're
isn't
talking
really
about
hard.
multi-million-dollar potential gifts that you're trying to negotiate, and you're dealing with a very successful business person on the other line that they are used to a return on investment, and this is the way that they're thinking, and this is the way that they're doing things, and they just want too much control. That's what it is. That's what the bottom line is. And the first and foremost thing to keep in mind is not to let any gift, any potential major gift, sideline your own organization's priorities. And that goes both ways. That's not, hey, it's me advocating for the donor. I can bring that message back to my organization and say, hey, Mr. President, this is what somebody's willing to fund. You know, I mean, that's one thing. But then, hey, no, we are going this way, and they want us to go the opposite direction with this thing, and they are offering a $5 million gift or $2 million gift or whatever it is. And so usually the first thing I ask internally is this possible? You know, right? Like, does this even fit? Does this make sense? Like, is this something that we would do? And if that's a yes, I'm always in the problem solving mode. I'm like, well, how do we make that happen? And then I have that conversation with the people that can actually pull it off. And I've had to actually tell somebody before, I'm sorry, we cannot accept that $2 million gift. Mm-hmm. Now, thankfully, it wasn't the $10 million or the $100 million gift, but a $2 million gift for me was a pretty big deal at that time. So it did hurt.
Most of the groups that are on here today, it's a pretty big deal to them as well, Kevin.
Yeah. And to be fair, they took their money and they put it where their mouth was, and they went and did the thing that they wanted to do independent of us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's all fine and good. And so I'm like, okay, well, I don't think that was it wasn't a win-win for us to take it over and have you come on board and essentially mm-hmm. have an executive role with us. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it was really tricky because they were either on the board or recently departed from the board. So they really had a lot of insider information. So it was a little tricky in that regard.
So that's one answer.
Both entities ended up okay after mm-hmm. the fact. So it's okay to say no. That's essentially it. It's okay to say no. And the outcome can be, hey, if that's what you want to do, you can start another entity, or you can give this to somebody who more closely aligns with you.
Ben, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think sometimes we live on the extremes, like a hard no, or, oh my gosh, $5 million, we should do this, right? I like to just pull back to what Kevin said is like, hey, is this even possible, right? And then the next step is, what I like to say is, maybe you should explore that. I don't know what that thing is, but maybe they see something from a different side that serves your mission and your vision better. What I like to do in those circumstances is kind of bring that donor along that journey and say, hey, we're doing the best that we can to think this through with you. And the answer might be no, but what's really cool is as they come along that journey, they're like, oh, well, we can't do it for this reason. And then they kind of, you've led them there, right, alongside of them. And many times they might do the same thing. They might take that $5 million gift and give it, but they still might give you a gift. I had this happen where the guy said, oh, I can understand how that could put too much risk for the organization, but I'm going to give the gift anyways, because I appreciate the time and attention to detail that you led me through that. So that would be my one thing.
That's a much better outcome than mine. Good job, Ben.
Mallory, what about you?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is just don't be afraid to involve a member of your program staff in some of those conversations. If it makes sense to help the donor understand why you have this vision for what you're trying to do and these programs that support that mission, and that's what we're focused on. Maybe you have a strategic organization plan in place, and you can show, kind of a donor-facing version of that and give the donor, instead of just saying, no, we're not going to do that, helping them understand, like Ben said, bringing them alongside you. This is why we're doing what we're doing. If you need a program person to support you in communicating that, I think it's great to involve them.
Jeremy, could I go back to a point that you and Kevin brought up earlier?
Yeah, you may.
I think it was Kevin who talked about kind of the anger, but he kind of fed into passion. One of my former mentors used to always say, hey, pay attention to donors' passion, both positive and negatively, like when it's extremes. I heard this from, I was talking to a philanthropist here in Denver who I'm friends with, and he was citing one of my clients about something they did really well. And I happened to know it. And I was like, well, yeah, hopefully my coaching worked, or our coaching worked. And what it was is he went to their gala, and he said their checkout system was so terrible and it was so awful. And he went on and on how much money they left on the table in 2023. And he said, you know what they did? They came to me in 2024 and asked me for a gift to solve that issue. How could I say no, right? And so I like to just say, hey, hone in on what the donors kind of hone in that passion, and just pay attention to that. Yes, it was anger and frustration, but it actually turned out into a gift for this client. So,
Mallory, similar question here. So we talked about what if they want too much control, but what if this is maybe a variant to that last question. What if they just want to, if they want to kind of guide you more about what you should raise money for? So like, hey, that's great. Actually, I don't think you should be raising money for that. I think you should be doing you know, this over here instead? It's kind of a variant question of the previous one, but I think that's not uncommon. Um, what do you do as a fundraiser in that situation?
Yeah, I think this goes back to, building that relationship where you're communicating your vision and what you're trying to do. Ben mentioned this in the beginning, always listening, letting them share their piece. That's certainly a key thing to start with. And then communicating why it is that your organization doesn't agree or that you're doing other things and trying to find maybe a common ground solution, or a way around that. I fundraised and raised money for scholarships. And so there were donors that sometimes wanted to restrict their scholarship, very specifically at a specific school, maybe their alma mater, for a particular degree or demographic of the student. And sometimes that just wasn't possible for us to accommodate. And it also wasn't something that we looked at. We weren't a merit-based scholarship. We were a needs-based scholarship. So sometimes donors would bring in, GPA into the equation or whatever it might be. And so we had to communicate the way that we were founded, kind of take it back to this is our program. It's been this way for 60 years. So sometimes the donor just doesn't understand that. And once you
Yeah.
explain it, they're like, oh, okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. And, so I think taking the time to really explain that to them, if you can be in person for these hard conversations, definitely try to do that, especially if it's a major donor that's worth the special trip to go see them and really steward the relationship back on track.
We can never um hard to underestimate how little even our biggest donors sometimes know about our organizations
Absolutely.
and our programs and why they exist, or why they're structured in a certain way, why the organization was founded and its story, to your point, Mallory. I think, yeah, people know much less about us. I mean, as people on this chat can probably commiserate with, like, our board members couldn't tell you what our 3 or 4 basic programs are, what our core programs are. They might stumble through a couple of them. And if they do better than that, that's great. Congratulations. So I think that's a good point. Like, to sort of stand on, well, let me explain, that totally makes sense why you'd want to do that. Let me just kind of explain where we're coming from, like why it is the way it is. And it all goes back to when Donnie started the foundation back and whenever, I mean, right?
Right,
And I
exactly.
think that's a good strategy. It's
Yeah,
very good.
and it's our programs have been working and we're not changing course now and kind of just
Yeah.
explaining
Yeah.
it to them, right?
Right. But don't say it just like that. Our
Right.
programs are working. We're not changing course for you.
Yeah,
Isn't that
no,
what you
it's
want to
just
say?
it's just kind of that's the overarching message that
Who do
you're,
you think you are?
you're
It's
going
not, that's
for.
not the message we want to communicate.
Right, right,
Like, we want to affirm the intention, I think, oftentimes, right?
right.
And then explain how we would want to partner with them. All right. Well, let's pivot here, Ben. I I I can only imagine why you suggested I ask you this question, because I'm sure you better have a good story to go with this one.
Yep.
What do you
Yep.
do if you've over asked? Over asked, that can lead to a difficult donor meeting.
Doing
Yes.
a good job for one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but sometimes people, I don't know, it gets a little bit weird if you over ask. But yeah, talk us through that.
Yeah, I would say, one, I would love to know like how you came to make that decision. I like to think that people are trying their best and they're working their hardest to make the best, put the best request in front of their donor. So maybe you did, maybe you didn't, right? I think that maybe
Well,
it
hold
was
on, hold on, hold on, hold on. No, 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 you're being too
you're just
theoretical. I
you're
want
just
you,
jumping.
I'm the donor. You
Yeah,
just asked me for $250,000. You thought you had good research on me. You've seen that
yeah,
I've given that size of gift to some other people.
yeah,
Um, we're well aligned. You've met with me 3, 4, 5 times. At this point, I've only been giving you 50 a year, but I'm like, whoa, dude,
whoa,
250. Where'd
okay,
you get that?
yep.
What are you doing now?
I would
Well,
say then if that's the case, kind of three things. One, apologize immediately, full stop. There you go. Then three follow-up things is the first thing I want you to do is emphasize relationship. The second thing is that you would like for them to make a gift that would most excite them, and at the end of the day, you'll be incredibly grateful for whatever they decide to do. And then lastly, seek clarity by saying, was it the timing or was it the amount? Right? Because I have had that happen, right? It just it was a guy was like, look, man, I'm being entirely overwhelmed right now. In fact, actually, conversely, I'm in a similar boat. Someone made an ask of me recently, and they were following up on it, and pretty intentionally, and intensely. But we just moved homes, and I have 4 kids, and we're moving homes and trying to sell the other home. And I'm like, look, dude, I love you, but I'm just a little busy right now. So it was actually more timing than it was the actual size.
Yeah.
So, so that's what I would go to is to apologize, emphasize relationship.
What does that mean? Emphasize relationship. I don't know what that means.
Just say, your relationship to us means more to me personally and to this organization than any size of the gift that you can make. The caveat is you have to believe that's true, right? There are some people who are like, I just care about the money. But like, I'm not advocating you say something you don't agree with, but but if you do, and it's true, because I some of the donors that I'm still friends with donors that I met 7 years ago, and I've been not in an active capacity that way, right? So and so you do care mostly. So I would say emphasize the relationship that means more to you than the gift. You want them to make a gift that they're excited to make, and that you're and that would they would be excited to make for, and then you'd be grateful for whatever they receive, and then seek clarity. Was it the timing or the amount? That kind of those three things.
Yeah. Kevin is over asking. You kind of laughed about this when I brought it up. I mean, is it better to over ask or under ask?
Oh, it's so best. I think it's better to over ask. So this is the sinking feeling in your gut when you ask a big number and they immediately say yes. That's the sinking feeling. That's I just left something on the table. I did something wrong. I think they would have gone for a higher number. And now it's too late to backtrack and get that going. Yeah. But I mean, you can come back sooner with another bigger ask later, but still it's not done. It's not gone. I mean, these are not over. I'll give you an example of one where I asked, I think, the perfect amount, and it was an over an ask. And it was reacted in that way in terms of Ben saying, or at least Jeremy, your scenario was, I asked $100,000. They had been getting 10.
Mm-hmm.
I asked $100,000. They were immediately uncomfortable, but not offended. And then their response was, that is twice as much as we would have guessed you were going to ask today. We have to go back and crunch some numbers and see.
Yeah.
And then they came back with okay, so they thought I was going to ask for 50,000, and they were ready to say yes at 50,000. I asked for 100, and then they gave 60,000, because after crunching the numbers, they were like, we can afford to give that extra 10. That's okay. And that was the perfect scenario. I did the right thing in pushing the envelope and having the conversation. If I asked for exactly 50, I would have left $10,000 on the table for that. I'm just speaking in pure numbers here. Neither of those things, and none of that hurt the relationship, mind you. So that was the other thing. It's obviously if it's a damaging thing. If you ask for $1 million and they can't even put 2 cents together, I mean, that's a different scenario.
Right. Kevin, let's stay with you for a question from one of our attendees, David Rich. I think he makes a good point. Like, and I'm sure Ben would probably clarify this too, but you don't want to apologize too much, right? As if what you were asking for it wasn't worth the amount you were asking for. Like you said, you're kind of hurting the value of your proposition. What would you say to David's question there in the chat? Can you over apologize?
I don't tend to apologize as a default, but I think that's a personality thing. I don't think that's a fundraising thing. So
you just don't apologize to anyone in your life.
I don't apologize a whole lot as a default disposition. So I would explain how I got to the number, and I can say I obviously made a mistake. So I apologize if I made a mistake in that. But there was a logic to it. I don't do anything without some logic to it. There was some reason. And so just share what the reason was and being open about it. Now, I have said this, and maybe it's actually a little short of an apology. It's me saying, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm sorry about that. So it's like, so that's not really apologizing for doing the thing. It's, I'm embarrassed that I've caused this kind of thing, and just kind of making that statement and then moving on from there. being sincere and just caring about them and what they wanted to accomplish with their own money. That's what it's not just matchmaking. It's I'm trying to help you do what you expressed to me what you wanted to do. So
Yeah, right.
like, I'm an advocate for you to my organization, and I'm an advocate for my organization to you. I'm trying to pave that way in between those two things.
Well, that's a great, I love that framing. That's really good. It's a very helpful framing to people. I'm an advocate to you, for what you want to do and what I've gathered from you in our previous meetings in our relationship, what you want to do. And if we're doing it that way, we can feel good about what it is we're doing. And then if we just missed on the number, we just missed on the number. Most people, though, at least in my experience, I don't know if you guys would disagree, you're most people are more flattered than they are offended if you ask,
Yes.
if you over ask. Now, there's a limit, or if people feel like you're treating them like an ATM, you know, like, man, I've given you $1 million a year every year. You always say you're never going to come back to me for this. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why that next ask might be offensive, but most people, if you're trying to make that jump, like Kevin was describing from 10 to 100, are like, yeah, I guess we are ballers here. We're the kind of people that are asking for 6 figures from now, you know, even though we can't quite do it yet. So I think,
To be fair, I also thought that they could, even after they
yeah.
crunched the numbers. But that was
You just disagree.
They were
show you
saving for
your
retirement. They didn't.
Let me show you your math is wrong. Yeah.
I think to David's point, though, one of the things I like to do is kind of allow people to sit in your shoes. And so I would say, look, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you felt that I over asked, or right. I would hate for you to feel that I was being obtrusive to this relationship. But what I do like to say is, you know, I have a tough job. I have to talk to people and ask them for money, and that can be an awkward, difficult conversation. And a lot of times when you kind of reframe that, David, I feel like they sit in your shoes and like, yeah, and almost every time I've said that, they're like, I could not do what you do. So I understand. And if you made a mistake, I like Kevin walking you through that thought process. I
like it. Activating a little sympathy there. I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. It's good, Ben. Hey, we had a good question in the Q&A. Mallory, I'm just going to give this to you randomly. But it's a really good question. So usually we reach out for a meeting with a donor. Usually they're going to be within our file. They're already giving to us, and they know why we're coming. But more often than you might think, it seemed to me, they don't. They don't. Wait, like they were kind of surprised that this is a solicitation meeting, that you're gonna make an ask, or you are making an ask. What's a good way to ensure that surprise doesn't happen? Is there a way when you're asking for the meeting to do that, Mallory, or when you arrive there? Like, how do you deal with that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of organizations have high MGO turnover, or maybe you're a small organization on this call and you're just launching a major gifts program. So maybe you haven't done a lot of that one-on-one in-person interaction with donors. So this is certainly something that could come up there. I think, at this particular question, it was meeting number 3, but I think meeting number 1 and 2 can lay the groundwork for this, right? So mention donor relationships and some of those golden questions, kind of figuring out the donor's philanthropic priorities. What are some of the other organizations that you give to? This is a tricky question, so only ask if appropriate, but what's the largest gift that you've ever made? Or tell me about a gift that you and your wife or you and your husband made that you're really proud of. So kind of talking to them about their philanthropy. You're interested in them in that case, and why they give to your organization and what they're interested in. And then doing your research. Kevin and Ben talked about, over asking. I think if you do your research, in some cases, you avoid some of those situations. You can't always avoid it, but figuring out other gifts that they may have made, or using some of the feedback that they gave you specifically about their giving. So laying the groundwork there that, you're a relationship person from the organization, but also you're a fundraiser. And so I think as you build that relationship, kind of making some of those points clear, and then in your ask, you're kind of giving this case for support for the organization, what you're trying to accomplish, asking them to partner with you in that. So the way that you make the ask, that it's not transactional, so they won't be as surprised, so to speak. And I'd love to hear Ben and Kevin's thoughts on this too.
Yeah, those are all good points, but I wonder if there's a technical answer as you in the email, the text, the letter, whatever you send when you're reaching out to this person, and it's a third meeting. So in our example that we have here from our
Yeah.
friend, um, is there should you be very clear? I've seen it both lots of different ways.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Just say, hey, I'd like to come talk to you about how a potential partnership um, between you and our organization to advance X or something? Or do you say, I'd like to come talk to you about um, your gift this year and thank you for the last 8 years of support? I mean, what do you say? How do you frame it up?
I think you can. In an ideal world, what I would say is if it's your third visit and they don't know that you fundraise for an organization, you've been building relationship too much. That'd be and I hope that's not too obtrusive.
Yeah.
But because at some stage you have to kind of come in and say, hey, Jeremy, I'd love the opportunity to ask you for a gift. Is now the right time, or when would the right time be? And so ideally that happens not on an email, but if you realize, oh man, this is the third visit and we've built up a ton of friendship. He may be thinking this is just a friendly visit. And so maybe I would do what you're saying and saying, hey, I would love to share with you this thing that I'm working on that I would love your insight on. And it seems like this jives with what you like to be a part of. Wouldn't, 2 Wednesdays from now make sense to get together, so maybe you could do an email, but in an ideal world, I would say
Yeah. Kevin?
I've got some input here in terms of, so this is from a director managing MGOs. There's a tension of giving an MGO permission not to ask.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, is right. So it's like, no, you're training people that the third visit is the ask visit, essentially. It's like, oh, this is what you're building up to. So yeah, so something went wrong in the first 2 meetings. If they're not expecting it, that's a problem. So one of the biggest teaching moment here is always get permission to ask as the prerequisite to the ask. And the permission to ask can be immediate. It can be on the second visit. It can be on an email. Like, permission to ask is not something that anybody's going to be offended for, and almost nobody says no to, and puts them on notice for the fact that, okay, yeah, no, this is going to be a solicitation. So that's the first thing is, okay, if I'm directing you and you're my MGO, what this scenario tells me is that you skipped a step, and it's an important step. It's the permission to ask step. So that's one thing that I need you to correct in that. Framing the initial conversation on the first visit, to Mallory's point, was, like that really appropriate question that you said, oh, when it's appropriate, ask this question. Chris Kidmeyer, our CEO, actually has a master class, and he says he did this on the first visit, and sometimes the first ask. And when I'm listening to this master class, I was like, that takes a lot of balls to just go right out and say, what's your biggest gift, and what's your philanthropic, mindset about, like. But framing the conversation from the onset with that will help you so much for the whole relationship. So that's another thing, that a corrective thing, you should probably be starting with that first visit and that first conversation with that framing, so that it doesn't get to be, okay, well, this is just a friend visit. This is just a friendly visit. And I've been guilty of that too, because I like to make friends and I like to visit people and travel. And so it's like, so I needed that as a corrective thing as an MGO, as a young MGO, is, okay, you're just going around visiting people endlessly. You need to get to the ask, and you need to do that. But so that what I started out with saying was, there's a tension in me giving an MGO the permission not to ask. But if the vibe is, if this is the ask visit and you've prepped everything and you have a proposal, or even if it's just verbal, whatever it is, if this is the ask visit, there is a tension there in terms of, I will give you permission to not ask on that day if it doesn't pass the vibe check, right? Like if we're talking about a complaint, if we're talking about something that went wrong with my kid that goes to school there, and this is the main topic of conversation is this negative vibe, don't switch from that negative vibe into, hey, by the way, well, you give me this. Maybe.
Great time to make an ask when things are in really a bad place. Yeah.
Postpone that gift and put a pin in it and say, okay, well, the next follow-up meeting, I get that permission to ask again. Like, I want to fix this for you, and I want to focus on that now. The next time we meet, would you mind if I come back and ask for a proposal about the thing that we wanted to talk to about originally? Like, so there's that tension. Like, I don't want to, as a default, I try not to give my NGOs permission to not ask, because if you give them permission to ask or not ask, they'll probably take that.
Yeah.
So, but you have to read the room. You have to feel it out.
What are your thoughts, Kevin, on, I'll ask Ben this question too, because he did this for a while. Talking about you do get in the friend zone sometimes with donors, and it's a good thing. I mean, I'm friends with donors back when from my just board member days as a president of an organization and doing some high level fundraising. But how do you escape that or put it to the side, or do you put it to the side when the time comes to make an ask? Like, how do you not get sucked so far into the friend zone that now it feels uncomfortable to do your job as a nonprofit leader?
I would say at the end of the day, so you made me think of this one couple. They're lovely. I didn't matter if I was doing the whole 30 or anything. I had to sit and eat whatever she baked, and there was no visit less than an hour, if not two. Right? They were the most lovely couple ever. They're amazing. And I think the way I framed it was, I would love to, I would at least catch up with them for 30 minutes and then say, oh, by the way, I really would love to talk to you about what we're doing here. And I would kind of, what Kevin said, like direct the conversation and say, at the end of the day, this is what I'm here for. And this is actually what we're here for, right? We can be really close friends, but we're ultimately, I'm serving you to realize this reality. So I don't know if that, so you don't take off your friendship hat, you just push them to do the thing.
And if they're that close, I've done this where I've opened up the meeting with it. Hey, can we get business out of the way first?
I love that.
I've done that before, but those are really tight. Those are really tight relationships. Those are the ones where it's always the.
But those are the only ones that are really awkward, is when it's a tight relationship. So I actually like that little tip. Like, hey, let's get business out of the way first, and then we can have fun the rest of the night tonight.
No, if business goes badly, then that's a really awkward day.
Well,
yeah.
Conversely, if you're meeting with friends or family who kind of have given already, but they have significant capacity, what I've done is I lean into that and say, hey, I would love the opportunity to talk to you about our organization because you've been so generous to us. We'd love to share kind of what we're doing. I'd love the opportunity to make an ask. Press pause on that. You're my friend first. You're my uncle first. You're this first. And that's paramount, right? And so I kind of say, and if you tell me at the end of the day you're not interested, I'm out.
Yeah. I'm out as your nephew. I will no longer be your nephew.
No more. Exactly.
That's one way to navigate it. Cut off all the friends and family. That's good, Ben. I like that. All right, let's get back to things that happen. We're going to try to get through more scenarios here that makes donor meetings difficult sometimes. Mallory, one thing that makes them difficult sometimes is, damn it, you're like the third or fourth MGO that has called them for a meeting in the last 4 years. Right. And so you call up, or you write, hey, here's who I am. Love to come meet with you. Like, what happened to Jimmy? What happened to Tara?
I had this happen a lot, in my past role, and there was some of that donor fatigue of just, we don't know who our point of contact is. We don't know who's running the place. So some of that, those new relationships are going to take a little bit more time to rebuild. If you're able to go see that person in person and show that, hey, I really care about building this relationship with you. Ben mentioned putting them in your shoes a little bit, and we've talked a lot about just being clear and transparent to these donors. Like, hey, I understand our organization has a lot of turnover. We actually have, a new structure for our development department. I'm really excited to be in this role. I took this job because of XYZ, or I'm passionate about this mission because of XYZ. And we're so grateful for your past support and just want to get to know you and learn more about why you've partnered with us. So being transparent with them in that way, I think, is important. Just the elephant in the room. I know I'm the third person you've talked to, and I'm sorry about that. We don't intend on, changing your point of contact rapidly. That's just sometimes, the way that this industry
do you try to multi-thread them in then, though? Do you make is it a good idea to try to make sure that they have another point of contact who's maybe likely to
Sure.
be more stable, like the president or
Absolutely.
executive
Yeah, I
director?
think depending on the donor level, I think it's
Yeah.
a great idea to bring in the president or CEO. If you have a new president and CEO that you know that they haven't met yet, I think that's
Mhm.
even more, of good reason to ensure that they're familiar with the leader of the organization and their
Yeah.
vision. So it might just be that first meeting or once a year that the president or executive director or CEO might join that. It doesn't need to be like they're a part of every,
No, right. That's
part of that relationship,
exactly.
but just that initial interaction and, parlor events or these kind of smaller friend raisers can be another good way to,
Mhm.
break the ice, get them back in a room of like-minded donors and in front of leadership.
In the end, they have to be what we want is for the donor to feel connected to much more than just the gift officer who has him or her in their portfolio, right?
Yeah, and I mean,
That's the problem.
right, and if there's been a lot of MGO turnover, maybe they don't feel connected to the organization at
Yeah.
all. Maybe they
Yeah.
haven't been told about
They
the
need to come
impact
take
of
a tour,
it.
visit campus, come
Right,
to an event, because they need to
right,
know like 8 people, not 1. If you
absolutely.
have 8 people at your organization, most of you do. I think that's gotta be part of the answer as well.
Yeah.
That's good.
Sometimes introducing them to other donors is a just
Yes.
way that too, right? Like it
Yep.
doesn't have to be just people from your organization because they can kind of maintain that relationship through. So
Right. Totally. Kevin, so I've had of the uncomfortable and difficult donor meetings I've had in the past, I remember 2 in particular that lead me to the next question. One, um, the guy was a raging anti-Semite, and I was like, "I just wanna get out of here. I do not like this person. I don't want to be associated with this person." It had nothing to do with what we were raising money for, just like he was trying to get me in on it. I'm like, I'm okay, thanks." Um, and another one, the guy was just batshit crazy, excuse me, everyone for my language, but truly nuts. It took like 10, 15 minutes to come out, but, all of a sudden we're on to I can't even remember, UFO it had to do with UFOs, but it wasn't even that insane.
Crazy,
Um,
crazy wealthy or just crazy?
no, and that's the big problem here, Kevin, is they weren't even big donors.
Yeah.
No, what do you do in those situations where you don't click with the donor or the donor prospect, or they just, like them? Um, and maybe it makes it more difficult if they're already in your file, right? There's somebody that are, some contributing some significant amount, but what thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, so not clicking with somebody. I mean, so this might come as some surprise to some of you who are watching this, but not everybody's going to like you, um, and you might not be everybody's cup of tea, right? So sometimes it's like you take it so personally. You're just like, okay, well, I'm not. So some people are going to be a little off put by how aggressively friendly I am. It's like I might just be a little too high strung for somebody, or I'm maybe just a little too loud. I do a fair bit of masking in terms of meeting somebody where they are and mirroring their their demeanor as best as I
Mhm.
can. But in the scenarios where I can come up with where that's happened, I've obviously it's like, yeah, you don't just leave and you don't just and
Yeah.
you can't just be like, excuse me, I'm going to the restroom, and then just ghost them.
Mhm.
The best case scenario that I had was that I went back to the organization. I actually had this frank conversation with my boss at the time, and I said, okay, I don't know what it was about this person, but I got the feeling that they didn't like me. And I think, and it actually had more to do with what Mallory was saying, is I think they liked the previous person so much more that
Mhm.
they were upset about the new person coming in. So it wasn't really about me. It was that they were upset about the situation of meeting somebody yet again. And maybe it was the third person or the fourth person. And so maybe that's what it was. But I was like, I got the feeling they just didn't like me. And what we did there was we had a small staff, and so maybe not everybody's going to have this capacity, but we actually moved them off of my portfolio and put them onto somebody else's portfolio for the sake of the relationship with the organization, not for the sake of him, but for the organization, right? And that was the other thing, and not for the sake of me even,
Mhm.
but for the sake of, I think we're going to do better by this donor if so and so handles this relationship and not me. Now, thankfully, that's only happened twice, and I don't know how many hundreds of people on my organization, but I'm also very keyed in on, it just wasn't working. And I'm like, I think it's okay to say it's not going to work with me, and I think that we can bring somebody else on. So really the biggest advice I have for this when this happens is ask for help, seek help, and bring in somebody else into the relationship. In terms of, sometimes it can just be that second person in the room that brings the tone of the whole meeting around it, and it changes that up a little bit. Now, if you have the capacity to bring a second person anyway, especially for a major donor, I also advocate that. Find a person who is former board member or faculty member in those areas, and try to pair up those relationships, so that I think a donor meeting is going to go better if you have two advocates for whatever organization you have with the donor or the couple donor, whatever that is. But those tend to go really well, at least better, in terms of you can play around with not always being in the conversation. You could direct the conversation and kind of be more of a maestro and less of a active participant of the night, if you can be that person on the wall, or bring your president, or obviously if you're working for a religious organization, you want to bring sister along. She's going to be the person that they're going to react.
Bring someone in a habit or wearing a collar if possible.
If you can manage it, let's do that. Is that an adequate answer, or is that not?
That's very good. Yeah, I think so. It's adequate to me. I think it's very helpful. Ben, I'm going to go back. We got a good question in the Q&A from Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. Anonymous Attendee. How many visits without an ask is too many? Is there a number or a baseline rule?
So there's no number or baseline rules, right? There's no hard and fast rule. But I like to go to your role is mission advancement, whether or not you call it development, whatever you call it, right? You can think of it as advancing the mission. So one of my colleagues used to say, I don't go into a meeting without some type of ask. It may or may not be financial, right? The ask might be, I would love the opportunity to come back to you in a couple of weeks and visit about what an ask might be. I'd love the opportunity. Would you host an event for us? So it doesn't have to be a financial ask, if you will. But if you are just, quote, building the relationship, you might want to figure out why that, like, there might be times navigating difficult donor meetings, the donor might say, I just want to know that you're friendly, that you're a good person, and, we can share life together. Well, great. Then that was the purpose of that meeting. So you should have some type of directive, if you will, for a meeting.
Answer the question, but typically it's not going to be 10 meetings without making
no.
It's not. It's going to be closer to 2 or 3. I was thinking at the max, typically.
At the max,
or sometimes one, or sometimes one.
Right.
The thing about what Mallory was talking about too was, if you're the third or fourth person, don't take for granted that you don't have to absolutely start at ground zero. And maybe they're ready for an ask, and be ready to ask, like to Ben's point. Yeah. So always be ready to ask if they're giving you an indication, even on the first visit. And that's one of the things that I try to coach my MGOs on, because they have a relationship with the organization, not just you. It's not all about you, and sometimes you show up on the first ask or first meeting, and you can do an ask. And so just
if you finally get that meeting with the billionaire you've been reaching out to for months or years, definitely make the ask.
That will be your only shot. Yeah, that's definitely worth
don't
mentioning.
Have time to cultivate some relationships over the space of 8-9 meetings.
Yeah.
So that's all true.
Ask unless he was friends with the donor for over a year. Most executives don't have that time to give, right? Like, so.
Yep, exactly. All right, lightning round.
As a young MGO, I was unprepared in my first year. I was unprepared to do those immediate asks on those donors. That was my only one shot. I didn't recognize it at the time, but it was my only one shot. They only gave me one meeting. It was going to be a half hour, and then they ended up shortening it to 20 minutes, and then they were 10 minutes late. So quite literally, I only had 10 minutes with that donor. And now, looking back at it, I was like, oh no, it was clear I was never going to get another 10 minutes with this guy. And that was my chance to do my elevator pitch and an ask right then and there. I missed that chance. It never came back. The guy floated away, and you can never get another meeting with him.
Yeah, donors come in different shapes and sizes with different time on their hands. Some are retired couples with with quite a bit of money and a lot of time in their hands, and some are busy executives who you get 10 minutes. And if they say, what can I do for you? Walk through the door, right? Okay, lightning round. We have 5 minutes and we end on time here at Amphil. Okay, quickly, Ben, why does your program cost so much?
Huh. A lot of times when I hear that question, it means they don't know enough about the organization, right? And one lady once complained about her budget was growing year over year, and I said, well, conversely, would you like it to decrease year over year, right? So a lot of times it's reframing and donor education. That's lightning round answer.
Mallory, yeah, I might give, but I never even heard back what the impact was of my last gift. I gave to the X project and I haven't gotten any kind of report.
Yeah, this is, we talk about keeping donors near, dear, and clear, and we've discussed kind of those principles over this entire hour, but you've got to make sure to keep them in the loop. And we talk a lot about a monthly touch point at least. Not all of those are asked, not all of those are meetings, some of them are updates. My favorite little tip is if you have a newsletter or some kind of update that goes out from your president or your CEO via email, forward that to your major donors and say, just want to make sure you saw this, you're a part of this. That's like one of the easiest ways you can get quick updates out the door.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that, by the way, the forwarding the thing, which they probably saw, but maybe they didn't, and now they get it from you with a little, hey, you made this possible.
Right. Statistically, they didn't see it, so yeah, it's important to.
True, you're right. The odds are against it. They saw it, so I love that. And Kevin, the donor, you got to make an ask. You've set it up. You've asked for permission. Here we're going to meet, and they insist on meeting you in a I don't know, a cheesecake factory or someplace like that with 1,000 people around. That's kind of loud. How do you make the ask in that situation?
Quite literally, the Cheesecake Factory. That was funny that you came up with that on your own. This is a tip I learned, I don't know how many years in, but arrive early and talk to your waiter. So arrive early, get the lay of the restaurant, try to find the best spot that you're the most secluded if possible. But even then, wherever you get sat, talk to your waiter and say, a tip is in it for you if, when I pull this binder out, you do not walk up on my table. Like, I am going to do an ask, and this is the presentation stage. I cannot be interrupted during this stage. This is very important. It'll be about 20 minutes. When I pull this binder out, don't come to the table. And I assure you, I will leave you a very big tip. And then, of course, you have to make sure that you pick up the bill, because otherwise that's really embarrassing. Or I have actually walked out of the restaurant and come back into the restaurant to get a tip. I have done that if the donor insisted on giving.
That's interesting. Yeah, good tip. This is a super good practical tip.
I would also sit with their back to the door if it's a busy restaurant, because a lot of times what I've learned is if people coming in and out, they're getting distracted by everything that's happening. So I like your tip, Kevin, but yeah.
That's great. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed joining us for another 1 hour of day drinking here at Amphil as we have these Scotch talks. I do want to draw your attention to this is just a casual, we have a lot of different questions going on here. We have a structured Major Gifts Masterclass happening on March 20th. The link is in the chat. We'd love to have you join us for that. You can also go to the Center for Civil Society website, centerforcivilsociety.org, and find more information there. We'd love to have you join us for the Major Gifts Masterclass on March 20th. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Ben, Mallory, and Kevin, for sharing your wisdom. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.